Welcome everyone to the first listening session of the Wisconsin Clean Energy Plan. And I'm so excited to have you here today to talk about the Clean Energy Plan. Is everybody seeing the presentation? Great. Welcome everyone to the first listening session of
Hold on one second.
Wisconsin Clean Energy Plan. And I'm so
hearing myself. Hold on a second.
Here today to talk about the clean energy plan. Okay, I turned myself off. Now is the YouTube live still on? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you so much for your patience with me while I work through the technical aspects of this. Now, are you all seeing my presentation? I think we're good. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. Excellent. So yes, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to have you here today to talk about the Clean Energy Plan. And for some of you, this might be a new topic area and you're just interested, and some of you might be have been more engaged along the way. And I'm going to give a short presentation here first to talk a bit about the Clean Energy Plan, why we're doing a Clean Energy Plan, and some of the strategies that we've been thinking about related to specifically economic and environmental justice. We will be hosting additional listening sessions coming up coming this Thursday as well as next Tuesday, and I will post those sessions. During the presentation, just ask, and during when other people are talking, just ask that you keep your mics on mute. And then I'll go through instructions on how you can make your comments later on. And feel free to turn your cameras on or off, whatever you feel most comfortable with. It's nice to see everybody's faces. So if you want to turn your camera on, that's great. So I'm going to just jump in here and talk a little bit more about the Clean Energy Plan. The plan itself First, I'd like to talk about the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the office, it was created via Executive Order number 38. And that we really work hard to make sure that we are creating policies and programs that support the clean energy transition and are really thinking about climate change and how is the clean energy sector, how is clean energy and the transition to clean energy going to help us to adapt to and mitigate climate change, the impacts of climate change. And so we have our charge to work on a clean energy plan. The office worked last year with the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change, which I will talk about in a couple minutes. And really what we want to do is we want to work with as many people as possible and talk to as many people as possible about this. And so we serve as a hub for all of the agencies on energy matters and work to connect everything that we're doing in energy at the state level, but also talk to stakeholders and local governments and advocates and individuals about how the clean energy economy is impacting them, or their ideas, or the things that we can do to create a pathway to greater emission reductions here in the state. So why is the clean energy economy important? It's really about people, planet, and prosperity. People making sure that everyone has equitable access to clean energy, making sure that our communities, certain communities aren't carrying the burden of energy, and making energy affordable for all, and growing our clean energy workforce, having good family paying jobs, and improving our health. So we want to make sure with emissions reductions that we're seeing that health benefit that's associated with that as well. We want to preserve our natural resources and this beautiful environment that we have around us. I apologize for having to take you from that environment. Such a beautiful evening here in Wisconsin, but I appreciate you all being here for this important issue as well. So also looking at the different resources that Wisconsin has, are looking at the different types of fuels that we could potentially produce, can we look at more solar, more wind? As we have a lot of cows, is there an opportunity for renewable natural gas and the use of methane? Things like that, where we can look to our own resources, as examples. And then overall reducing emissions so that our air quality is much better here in the state. And then prosperity, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but really this is about economy and the cost of our energy needs and making sure that we're reducing the billions of dollars that are leaving the state and advancing innovation and looking at the great opportunities for new technologies and trying to move faster and trying to be innovative and get those technologies deployed so that Wisconsin can really be a leader in the clean energy transition. So one of the important things that we talk about as well is we can't continue to operate as business as usual. There is a cost to inaction, and it's important to talk about this and as it relates to climate impacts. We have all seen extreme weather events. We've seen the impacts of extreme heat, and we need to build resilience in our system. And I've seen plenty of articles, but there was an article, I think in the Washington Post, I think it was, that had stated that's like 98% or around there of all US citizens have experienced some sort of climate impact at some point in their life. That's a huge number. And that almost all people in Wisconsin counties have in that particular study, and talks specifically about Wisconsin, but there's another study out there that talks about the number of people and the number of counties that have been affected. All Wisconsin counties have been affected by some form of climate change. And our citizens and the people in the state are deeply affected by it. And so this is one of the reasons why we're working on a clean energy plan and really honing in on the clean energy sector and on the energy sector, and then all of the interdependencies of all the other sectors like transportation, buildings, and the other ones as well, industry, just to make sure that we recognize those interdependencies, but we're looking at how are we consuming energy and how can we change that and how can we do it quickly. Health impacts is another. We know that with increased emissions, you're going to have increased health issues, including asthma, heart attacks. And these health issues are actually exacerbated in communities, Black, Indigenous, and person of color communities that have traditionally bear the weight of these emissions because of where they're located. And that's where we talk about environmental justice and racial justice, that these emissions impacts are hurting these communities, as well as racial climate impacts have been hurting communities as well. So we want to keep that in mind as we move forward. Energy spending deficit is huge here in Wisconsin. We're still primarily reliant on fossil fuels. Only 9% of our energy comes from renewable energy. And so we have a long ways to go. And so because we are a net energy importer, that means we're a net money exporter because we have to pay for that energy, which means that approximately $14.4 billion leaves the state for our energy needs. So what can we do to keep that money here? How can we generate the energy here? How can we be more efficient? What are the things that we can do to keep our economy bustling and keep that money in the state? Also, too, if we don't look at the clean energy economy, we're going to be missing out on many, many more good paying jobs. And we want to take advantage of that with innovation and with the renewables that are being deployed here in the state, the opportunity for energy efficiency, the opportunity for grid upgrades. So we want to make sure that we don't miss out on the opportunities for these great paying jobs. So how do we get to where we are today? So we started out last year with the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change. And many of you are probably participated in some of those listening sessions. And we heard from a lot of stakeholders, including youth activists, elected and tribal officials, very diverse perspectives on what we should be doing to address climate change. And energy is a portion of that. Transportation was a portion of that. Agriculture was a portion of that. And as a part of that effort, the task force came up with 55 climate solutions covering 9 sectors and 3 different policy pathways. And then there was the tier 2 recommendations that were 9 policy options that didn't necessarily have consensus, but they were a reflection of the diversity of perspectives and could potentially be picked up in other planning processes. So that's something that we took into consideration as we were moving forward with this clean energy plan, was the work that was done by the governor's task force on climate change, and what can we do to create some momentum behind some of those recommendations, but also look holistically and widely that task force report doesn't have everything as it relates to energy, and what can we do to ensure that it is comprehensive. So we started out this process last fall, and what we did is we went to and recognized and built on the fact that there are a lot of other planning processes that have already been initiated, including the governor's task force on climate change. If you have not seen the Mid-Continent Power Sector Collaborative, power sector, transportation sector, and business or building sector roadmaps, those were initiated and were a group of folks representing all sorts of utilities and advocacy groups that came together to talk about, some prioritization of policies and ideas and strategies around power sector, transportation, and buildings. And that was conducted by Great Plains Institute, who's also helping us with our efforts here. And also the Wisconsin Energy Distribution Technology Initiative, WEDI. That's another group that involved utilities and advocates, state agencies, where we got together and talked specifically about the power sector, about the grid, and the things that we need to do with the utilities to transition to a clean energy economy and to reduce our emissions reductions. And also the state of Wisconsin also joined the U.S. Climate Alliance. Governor Evers joined the U.S. Climate Alliance right when he started his tenure as governor. And there are a lot of strategies that the 26 states that are involved in that effort that are part of that effort are working on. And so we're factoring in some of those as well. And then just making sure that we recognize that there's a lot of work happening, and we need to be talking with everyone about the clean energy plan, especially local governments, businesses, and utilities. Many of you know, and many of you have seen, the utilities have already announced their carbon emission reduction goals and are already moving towards that. So what can we do to support that, but also look at all the options and opportunities that we have here in the state to transition? So to develop the plan, we're really looking at what can we do to create momentum to get us towards 100% carbon-free electricity consumed by 2050, and what can we do to move ourselves towards contributing towards the Paris Climate Accord. And the president recently announced the United States nationally determined contribution, which is 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. So as a member of the U.S. Climate Alliance, and as a state that's trying to reduce our emissions, we are keeping these two goals in mind as we're thinking about deep decarbonization, especially in the power sector. But as I'd mentioned before, there are interdependencies. So as you transition and electrify buildings or transportation, we also have to be thinking about our grid and how does that demand affect our goal, and kind of putting that all the puzzle pieces together to figure out what's the pathway to get us there, and what can we do right away that's actionable and high impact that we can get that momentum, and who's going to be doing that, who's accountable for that. So putting some accountability and some definition around the pathway towards implementation. And while there's a wide swath of strategies, one thing we want to make sure is that we have overarching priorities that are integrated within all those strategies. And prioritizing environmental justice and equitable economic development is weaved throughout and needs to be weaved throughout the plan. That everything we do as we transition needs to make sure that we focus in and prioritize environmental justice, and ensuring that everything that we do benefits all citizens in the state, and that we have equitable development here in Wisconsin. We also want to fast track workforce development and just transition. and make sure that we're supporting diversity in workforce development. And that knowing that we are going to be shutting down coal generation facilities, understanding the timeline for that, and how do we transition those folks that are working at those facilities into family supporting jobs. Also, the state, sorry about that. Also, the state needs to lead by example. So we as a state are telling everybody, hey, let's address climate change. Let's reduce our energy consumption here in the state. Let's transition to clean energy. Well, we as state agencies also need to be doing that. So as we're talking about the different pathways and the different opportunities, we need to be looking within our state agencies as a leader and setting an example for other businesses and local governments. So our objectives, in addition to the emissions reductions that I talked about before, we really want to reduce the disproportionate impacts of energy generation and use on low income and communities of color. We want to make sure these communities are prioritized and receiving economic and health benefits and equitably receiving those, just like any other, just like everyone. If we could just have equity across the state in this realm, it would be ideal. And so we want to work towards that. Also, we want to, as I mentioned, maximize the creation of equitable opportunities for clean jobs. We recognize that there could be potentially a lot of funding coming from the federal government. How do we prepare ourselves for that? And making sure that we retain those energy investment dollars here in the state, but also thinking about the money that we're sending out of state and how do we keep that money here in Wisconsin. As well as we always have to continue to think about reliability and affordability of the energy system. That has to be front and center to ensure that you also have access to energy. But it's this big puzzle that we're putting together to make sure that we can keep in mind all these objectives and making sure that we ensure prioritization of the environmental justice and the equitable economic development. And training is going to be so important. Workforce education, retraining those who are currently in fossil fuel positions to potentially move into clean energy jobs or energy efficiency jobs. And then protecting human and environmental health by reducing ecosystem pollution. So if we are able to move the needle and we really are able to reduce emissions here in the state, we're going to see health benefits. And we're going to see the result of our actions here. And that's why we want to make this an actionable plan. We want to define the way that we want to move forward, and we want to measure ourselves. So this is going to be a living document what we will do is push out version 1 of the document, and we will have ongoing input, and we will continue to measure ourselves, because we don't want to push out something clean energy plan that says, here's a snapshot in time and here's what we're going to do. But then we never go back to it and say, hey, did that work? Hey, we held this, we had some accountability here for, the state to do A. Did they accomplish that? The utilities said they were going to work on, transitioning to carbon free emissions, and how are they doing on that? And so we want to continue to model out different strategies, and we want this to be living and making sure we're measuring ourselves along the way. So this is the start of hopefully a lot of listening sessions and a lot of opportunity for input along the way. Tonight, we're going to talk about economic and environmental justice. Environmental justice is really to ensure that we have meaningful involvement from everyone, that traditionally disadvantaged communities, low income, Black, Indigenous, and persons of color have been left out of the conversation in transforming our country's energy system and transitioning to clean energy. And they're also suffering a disproportionate burden of the energy system from both a cost perspective and emissions and health perspective. That can no longer be business as usual. That is unacceptable, and we need to figure out a way to change that. And the Clean Energy Plan is prioritizing that to ensure that we can come up with strategies to do that. Also, mitigating climate change is a big part of this, and making sure that communities are involved in decision making on clean energy technologies, jobs, financial impacts, and health impacts. So we want to make sure that we're reaching out to as many communities possible. Like recognize, I'm so glad that you are all here. But also too, I want to make sure that we can get the word out to communities about the clean energy plan. And those who aren't here and aren't able to make it still have the opportunity to provide the input. And how do we extend that reach and make sure we're reaching all communities? But some of those ideas are, bringing some of those ideas out will be super helpful. As well as I talked a little bit about it before, supporting training, apprenticeships, and high-paying jobs, and making sure that we're creating conditions that effectively support BIPOC communities, tribal nation members, women's veterans, to be able to pursue employment and business ownership in this field. So not only transitioning people from fossil fuel, but like creating that entrepreneurial spirit here in the state and that innovative spirit here in the state to be able to make sure that, you know, we give everybody the opportunity to have a part of this clean energy transition. So that is my presentation. I'm just going to go over a couple of logistics here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop screen sharing and then we'll open it up for comments. And so just some general things that might be different than what you expected from if you've attended other like budget listening sessions or the governor's task force listening session. We're actually all going to stay in the same room for this one. We welcome any commentary related to economic and environmental justice. Some examples are ideas for public policies, ideas for programs, success stories on the local level, success stories in other states. We are, as you can see, we are streaming this live and we are recording this. One thing I forgot to mention at the beginning, we do have some help from Slipstream and Great Plains Institute, just giving them a shout out for their help. They are listening in on this and helping me along in the process with you know, ideas that are shared, like can we model that? Do we have data related to it? So there is a technical side to this clean energy plan to ensure that we can measure what the impacts of certain ideas are. And also too, there are likely some state agencies on today as well. I've invited all the state agencies to participate in all the listening sessions. We will also be sharing this information and the recordings with the state agencies so that they can watch this, because the clean energy transition practically involves every state agency. And so we want to make sure that they hear what you have to share and your ideas and your concerns. Anything that you would want to share tonight, please feel free to do so. We're here to listen. I may ask a few clarifying questions, but really we're just here to listen tonight and get your thoughts on the transition. So if you're not familiar with Zoom, I'm hoping a lot of you are, but just in case you're not, on your bottom panel, you'll have a thing that says reactions. It's a little face and you can click that and then there's a raise hand button. So what we'll do is we'll go through and I'll call you in order of raising hands. And if you're not raising hands, I will maybe ask some prompting questions to see if that helps, you know, move things along. So I'm going to exit out of here. Stop sharing. All right. So let me get my screen situated here. I don't know what happened. All right. Well, my Zoom screen just went a little weird. So, Caitlin, can you help me out? There we go. I don't know what is happening with my screen. So, I was going to say, Caitlin, can you see who has a raised hand? I can't see right now on my screen.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Do you just want to go ahead and start calling on folks while I figure out what's going on here?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can see in what order they were raised. My apologies. But on the top left of my screen is Kermit Hoovey.
Why, hello. Thank you. I mainly have a concern that I think has already been acknowledged by Ms. Redmond, that the people here, I mean, not everybody's cameras are on, so I don't know what our representation is, but I recognize a fair number of names and some faces, and to some extent, it's the usual suspects. I mean, people who are concerned, committed, engaged, anxious to see the state take powerful action to address climate change and come up with a clean energy plan. And somehow redoubling efforts to engage and reach out to BIPOC and low-income communities to give them a chance to have the voice, because when it comes to what constitutes an equitable process or an equitable policy or a just process or just policy, from my position of privilege, I don't have the felt real world experience to speak to that. I can pass along words, pass along stories, pass along my insight from creative imagination, but we need to get those voices here. And I wish I had some magic solutions to that, but fundamentally, I just really feel led to underscore the importance of addressing that. And to that end, I don't know what outreach you were able to do in preparation for this. I saw a press release being circulated. I saw some emails exchanged from people who are kind of in the loop. But that doesn't work for most people, and especially people in the BIPOC and low income sectors of our society. And I think it's going to take, I hate to say it's going to take money and people to do almost door to door, face to face hand holding and conversing to draw people out and draw people into conversations like this, where you and the state departments that are also here will get the kind of valuable feedback that we really need to get if we're going to have an equitable and just outcome to the clean energy transition. So, and I know, for the record, my name is Kermit Hovey, and I'm active with a number of different climate advocacy groups, including 350 Madison and Citizens Climate Lobby. And so we're in that advocacy space, also very much aware of this challenge and very much struggling to find ways to address it. So we want to work with you on that and encourage you to lead the way. Was that something you were saying you wanted to do?
Definitely.
So with that, I'll conclude and thank you very much. And I'll apologize for not being able to lower my hand. My screen is also doing goofy things right now with Zoom, so I empathize with you, Maria.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can't see anybody. I can't even see my Zoom anything, and I'm afraid to turn it off. Can you see me as well?
We can see you.
Okay.
We can see you, Maria.
Okay, that's great. I can't see anybody. I'm actually looking at two black screens right now, so I can actually see the transcript, and that's it. So Caitlin, if you could help me out and call on the next person, that would be super helpful, and I'll try to problem solve over here. But I won't do anything crazy knowing my video is still on and I can't turn it off.
Yeah, so we'll have Mark Silverman go next.
You seem muted, Mark.
Yeah, we can't hear your audio, Mark, but it's
Yeah, I'm clicking the unmute.
oh, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, I kept clicking unmute. Thank you very much. And Kermit is psychic because he knew exactly what I was going to comment on. And that is, how do we reach what I would call ordinary people? Unlike those of us who might, well, myself, I just retired and I have some time. And so I can do this kind of things. But one idea I had would be to reach certain, reach out to either school systems such as the Milwaukee MPS, community organizations. Also Milwaukee, where I'm from, is community advocates. And there's lots of organizations that might be able to get the message out to those people who might not have kids and be connected to a school system. Of course, religious organizations and any other kind of organizations where ordinary people could get the message so we can hear their input. And that was really, my background is, I'm an attorney and I worked in the housing law area, legal action in Wisconsin for 30 years. And I'm the president of the Wisconsin Animal Protection Society, which has been around since the early 90s. And all of this climate change and everything, of course, affects animals as well as humans. So thank you very much.
I just wanted to ask Caitlin if you're looking at the participants list. I see Kathy VM as the first one with the hand raised.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Let's go with Kathy next then.
Thank you. I'm Kathy. I live in La Crosse. I'm retired, but I worked for the Upward Bound program at UWL for almost 30 years. There are three things I'd like to mention that we can get hopping right away on the first one, and that is the cheapest, quickest, cleanest energy is energy we don't use. So let's start right now putting money out so that communities can tighten up homes, maybe start with public housing or low and middle income housing, rental units. You know, we wait for landlords to find some benefit. Well, maybe they won't find some benefit, but we will. So that's the first thing. Let's stop using energy where we don't have to by tightening up homes. That will also increase jobs and you know, some things like insulation can be made in state. So that's the first one. Second, transportation. You know, we really have to decide if we're gonna expect people who can't afford to buy a gas car to now buy an electric car. What we need is public transportation, really good public transportation that is connected, not just in the cities or towns, but also to the rural areas and also across the state. We have crappy public transportation in our state right now, and that could be much better. So that's the number two. And going back to EVs, if the state could come up with some way to facilitate communities, individuals, nonprofits to start, you could call it We Share EV or something. I have an electric car. I'd love to share it with 5 or 6 other families, but right now there's not really a way to do that. I think the insurance system is not set up to do that. But if I could do that, that would mean families now buying and paying lots of money for personal vehicles could get rid of that expense. So I feel all of those three solutions would help with equity issues, would provide more jobs, good paying jobs, would reduce the amount of money that people have to spend on necessities and transportation, and could be done pretty easily, pretty quickly, and not for that much money. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Next on the list is Megan Pierce.
Hello, I just want to thank you for the time tonight and hearing our conversations. What I want to talk about is, well, I just want to support everything that everyone's been saying. I think those are very important points. What I wanted to talk about tonight is a report that came out earlier this year, and it was named Energy Burden in Milwaukee. A study reveals major disparities and links to redlined areas. And this was released by a partnership of climate action groups in Wisconsin. And it focused on energy burden of households in predominantly Black, Hispanic, and Latinx neighborhoods. And it shows that roughly double that of households in that, that the energy burden is roughly double that for those communities than predominantly white neighborhoods. So what I wanted to talk about my thoughts on that, and I see that personally as a housing case manager working with low income individuals in the Madison area. And so I think like a goal for us should be to focus on moving away from fixed energy bills, because I see fixed costs as inequitable. They hit low electricity users harder than high electricity users. Low income customers bear a disproportionate burden, and fixed fee increases consume a large share of the incomes of those who are the least able to pay. And if we ended fixed rates, this would encourage people to lower their energy usage, which would have an impact on our current climate crisis. So I feel like we need to ensure that our most impacted communities don't have to suffer further from undue energy burdens, when power, I feel, is something that just should be a basic right for everyone. So I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for hearing me today.
Thanks for sharing, Megan. Next on the list is Rose Booth.
Thank you. My name is Rose Booth. I'm with the Sierra Club Wisconsin Chapter Lands team. I wanted to thank you for your presentation. There are many good things being said by the presentation and by the people that are speaking here tonight. As a member of the lands team, I just wanted to raise the issue that the number 2 cause of climate change after carbon emissions is habitat destruction. And we wanted to make sure that the governor's task force is aware of that, and that you're including the DNR in your conversations, and that the DNR is looking out for our habitats, for land that needs to be preserved. We're specifically interested right now in what's going on at Coler Andre, where a rare habitat is being threatened. And we just wanted to make sure that that was on the table, that we're all aware that habitat preservation is very important. Clear cutting is, I'm sorry, my mother has dementia and she just walked into the room. And that clear cutting of forests should be something that is very much taken off the table. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. And I know I can speak to the fact that the DNR and multiple other state agencies have been involved in reviewing the Clean Energy Plan, specifically in portions where their agency is mentioned. So I can speak to that, that issue there. But thank you again. And then Marjorie Lewis next. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to speak primarily as a mom today and just say that I'm very concerned about the impact climate change will have on my children's future. And I would like the state to pressure utilities in whatever way possible to build no new fossil fuel infrastructure. I know that's part of the plan. But it seems like the utilities aren't getting the message. And I'm just wondering if there's any way through the permitting process or any other ways that the state can intervene to try to make it difficult for utilities to move forward with plans like these, and to insist that they come up with innovative solutions or just weatherization programs. There's lots of ways that the utilities could get at the issue that the reason that they say we need these new fossil fuel facilities. I think that it's too late for us to negotiate nicely. I'm very concerned, and I think that we need to attack this problem on all fronts as urgently as possible. And whatever we can do to prevent those new facilities from being built, I think is what we should do. Thank you.
Thanks for expressing that, Marjorie. And And then I have Nick number 2 next on the list.
Hello, that's Nick Nichols with La Crosse. How you guys all doing? Wonderful, I hope. Anyway, couple of points. Glad you guys quoted the COWS report. The Center on Wisconsin Strategy basically put together a report that showed that if we could eliminate our state's energy deficit of $14 billion, we could add $13 billion to the state's GDP and create 160,000 jobs. If you want equity, this is the way to do it. Let's stop sending our money to the Powder River Basin in Wyoming and in Indiana and Illinois and North Dakota, and let's just keep our money here. The quickest way we can make the transition happen to all electric energy use within the state, which includes transportation, would be third-party opportunities for businesses to come in and put up infrastructure, especially for municipalities and nonprofits. Just imagine if we could have a huge amount of wind turbines off the coast of Milwaukee, and Milwaukee got a share of that energy production. They could actually use that to help reduce taxes, reduce costs. We could clean our air and improve our health, all at the same time while we're creating some income for our municipalities instead of just handing everything over to the utilities. It's time we take control of some of this production for the benefit of our people in this state. You know, we could even use a portion of that money to help fund a state promise program. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar, but there's a promise program in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where if you go to the public schools in Kalamazoo, you are guaranteed a 4-year scholarship, free and clear, to college. How's that for equity? These are opportunities that are out there. These are things that we can do, and we can do them today. On another note, Focus on Energy isn't big enough. They have a couple of $1 million that they invest in energy efficiency. That's not enough. If you added 1 cent to the cost of energy in the state of Wisconsin, 1 cent per kilowatt hour, you could raise $600 million, and that would help with the transition to get to all clean energy in this state. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Next on the list, I have Karen Voss.
Thank you. My name is Karen Voss, and I'm from Eau Claire and am active in a number of environmental groups. Wisconsin Conservation Voters is one that I care a great deal about. I think the issue that I particularly want to just touch on is that of equity, of the impacts of energy generation, and the fact that right now are disproportionately the communities of color and low-income people take the blow, and actually, I guess could say, take the heat when it comes to climate change and the and who suffers the most from it. And I also want to link that to the idea that I'm imagining that as the programs get put together and the funding comes through, that there will be criteria that are identified to in which it's discerned who is eligible to apply for grant funding and to utilize the funding that's going to come into the state. And I have discovered recently that sometimes the criteria are written in a way that the very people who suffer the most are left out of the loop when it comes to being eligible to apply for funding to correct the problems in their community. And because that I became aware of that quite recently, I think it's really important in the process of developing the ways that this funding is going to be used, that we look at where where populations inequitably suffer the brunt of our current energy pollution and energy producing facilities, and make sure that criteria are developed in a way that these are the communities that have greatest access to the funding that's needed. And that this includes things that correct some of the problems in these communities. These are heat islands where, because of the way, the lack of green space, the lack of things like changes on the local level, on the individual housing unit level, creating more green space, not putting pollutant generating energy facilities in their area. I think these all need to be paid attention to, and the criteria that's used needs to be set up in a way that these areas get access to the funding, even more so than some of our wealthier communities around the state. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Next, we have Patrick Stoffel.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation and for letting us speak and to contribute. Just three quick things, that suggestions or ideas I thought of. One, I follow up on kind of what Nick was. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm from Mazomanie and a member of Citizens Action and Sierra Club as well. I guess kind of piggybacking on kind of what Nick was saying before, getting solar energy installed on people's homes, panels. I had that done in my house. I bought my first home, and I had panels put on. I had someone come in that could find all my ways to reduce energy usage, and then we put panels on the roof, and the panels can be financed through your mortgage, or maybe even a better way would be through the utility companies over time. And if you reduce that amount enough, you could get to where you can actually, it's not going to cost you anything to put those panels up. It'll actually save you money. And that's one thing. And another thing I just wanted to mention, I really agree with that rail or with transit throughout the state. I think if we could somehow get more, I like rail, and I think rail would be a good idea, but anything to connect the cities better and allow people to go from here to there, whether it's for work, from rural communities to the bigger cities, for jobs, for work, or what have you, I think is important. I know where I live, Mazomanie is like 20 miles to Madison. We got a train track out here, but no, there's no commuter, of course. And what would it take to do that? I don't know. Doesn't have to be fast, just something to go back and forth. But the big thing, last thing is briefly a factory farm elimination. The emissions from these farms, the pollution, the jobs that they're taking away from regular farmers. We could be renovating regular farmers, by putting panels, windmills, spreading the animals out to these farms rather than concentrating them in these torture chambers, these factory farms, and the pollution they create. And I think that would be a huge thing. Outlaw these things, spread the farming animals throughout the state, get farmers doing energy production, rejuvenate agriculture in the state. So, and that would help all those energy and economics and what have you. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Patrick. The next person on the list is just a letter, M.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. My name's Mike Putnam. And before I make my comments, let me ask you one question, because that'll help me decide where I want to go with my comments. Is the goal of the Evers administration to increase the size of our economy, achieve a steady state economy, or to contract the size of our economy?
I think it's to improve the economy. So if that means expanding the opportunities for economic development here in the state, we certainly want to do that. I think I'm not speaking on behalf of the Evers administration. I'm here to listen to your thoughts on the clean energy plan. So I just want to make sure.
So does improving the economy mean increasing our GDP?
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about clean energy, there are strategies that do that. And so certainly we want to explore those types of strategies.
So if I understand you, you're trying to expand GDP with the use of clean energy.
That is potentially one of the strategies. Yeah. I mean,
okay. So let me ask then, are the limits to growth studies that have been that was first published in 1972, and there have been follow-up studies on it, informing your work on this energy plan at all?
So we have some modeling that's being done. Slipstream is helping us with the modeling, and so they have been looking at different sets of data. I would have to confer with them what data sets they're using and if they've used that. But they are using a modeling tool that looks at GDP and those economic factors.
Well, let me talk about the one thing I will talk about is your notion that you're going to grow the economy with clean energy. And I think that that's an unrealistic goal. And I want to talk about energy return on energy invested. And our economy was built on the heyday of exploitation of fossil fuels. And so, for example, let's take oil, which is the current and lifeblood of our economy. So when we first started using oil, the amount of energy it took to get oil out of the ground, and then the amount of energy that we got in return, that ratio was anywhere from 1,000 to 100 to 1. But as we've picked all the low-hanging fruit, exploited the sweet spots, the energy return on energy invested for conventional oil is now down to about 1 in 20. We're only getting 20 barrels for every 1 barrel going in. And many of the more let's say tar sands, well, those the energy return on energy invested is in the single digits. And the same thing is also true for many of our so-called clean energy technologies. The energy return on energy invested is quite low. It's in the single digits. And I just don't know how you think you're going to substitute these technologies with a low energy return on energy invested for the huge amount of energy that we consume every year from fossil fuels which have at least double the energy return on energy invested than your clean technologies. Secondly, clean technologies aren't clean. Getting rare earths is very damaging. And currently, almost all of our so-called clean technologies are built with fossil fuels. We're not building clean technologies, so-called clean technologies with clean technology. We're still using a large amount of fossil fuels, and that's for everything from extracting ores, refining, transportation, construction, the whole kit and caboodle. And I think that what our future holds for us is everybody using a lot less energy, and that we're not going to be able to maintain this high energy lifestyle that we've we're lucky enough to have experienced because we just happen to ride the crest of exploitation of fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you. And just, I appreciate the context there. I do want to remind everyone that we also will be having a session on clean energy and energy efficiency. And so like, I think your comments fit really well in that session. Just want to make sure that we also think about, you know, the economic and environmental justice aspects of the transition. And I appreciate that not every comment is going to be positive, and not every comment is going to be negative, but just making sure that we that you know that you can also attend the clean energy and energy efficiency session next week that will be focused on that particular topic.
Well, I guess what I was getting at with my comments about the equity is that the energy that's going to be available to us is not going to allow us to lift everybody up to the energy consumption of the rich. It's more likely that some of the rich are going to have to come down to a lower lifestyle and a lot less energy consumption in the future.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. All right, Dr. Andrew Lewandowski, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's good to see a lot of friendly faces. Thank you for the presentation earlier tonight. And I think that just building off of that and building off of things that other people have said, it's that we have already done a lot of speaking about these things, and that's great. And before I speak anymore, I just want to acknowledge that where the location that I'm speaking from was previously occupied by the Kickapoo, Ho-Chunk, Peoria, Sauk, Sioux, and Miamia tribes. And when I think about air and water quality, when I think about climate justice, environmental justice, we do often think about in medicine who's disproportionately being harmed by those contaminants and by a warming climate. And there are 4 populations that come to mind when I think about biological differences in who people are. And that would be children, pregnant women and their unborn children, elderly, and people with chronic medical conditions. These are 4 categories of people who, just based on biologically, physiologically, how their bodies are working, they're at risk when it comes to poor air and water quality. They're at risk when it comes to the 9 different ways that climate change is affecting humans. And at the same time, it's also very clear and important to recognize that there's another category that's not founded on a biological basis, and it comes from discriminatory divides. And we see lots of discriminatory divides. We see wage and salary divides when it comes to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We can see homeownership and wealth disparities, access to jobs, employment, access to government programs or government help, educational opportunities, justice and incarceration considerations, daily living expenses, environmental exposures, medical care, political power, social mobility. These are a number of discriminatory divides that we see that contribute to who has power in society and who's able to make policies and for whom those policies are going to benefit. And so one thing that I would encourage and have seen throughout the course of the governor's task force and have seen in other public listening sessions is that people are considering that web of racism, that it's not just redlining, that it's not just discriminatory housing practices, but it's how all of these factors commingle to create a structure or a policy structure that is rigged against people who do not have light-colored skin. And if there's anything that I would like to encourage tonight as a pediatrician in the state of Wisconsin, it's that let's take that information that we already know and that we've discussed at length over the last year, and that has been coming to our attention for decades, if not hundreds of years. And I would like to see more action. So let's take these clean energy plans. Let's take those government, GTFCC task force recommendations, and let's take the power that we have within the executive, legislative, or judicial branches with the PSC. And I'd really like to see policies that actually enact a change. Because talking about things is important, getting public input is important, but until we actually start to see improvements on the ground, until we start to see improvements in the air and improvements in our water, then I'm not going to see the health of my patients and the other people in Wisconsin change. So that's what I would really like to say tonight, is that we have a lot of information, we've done a lot of talk, and I'd really like to levy a call to action from the government and from our governor's office especially. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. Next, we have Dale Olin.
Hi. Hey, just a couple of things that I would like to mention. One is I would just really strongly encourage this task force or this planning group to work with or put in place working with the unions in the state of Wisconsin, especially like the energy utilities, with any kind of unions that are involved with that group, with unions who are already working on renewable energy areas, and to help strengthen those unions, which is difficult in Wisconsin for all kinds of reasons that we know, because the unions are the ones who are going to really help the transition from jobs in the fossil fuel sector or the utility sector to move to more renewable energy kind of jobs. And I think the unions have the ability, or could have the ability, to negotiate with management to get better kind of conditions set up so that people can make that transition over to other kind of jobs that are going to be more healthy for our environment. So that's one very important piece that I would like to encourage. And the second one is something that you've already mentioned, which is the plan to start developing the training processes right now, so that when that transition starts to take place, we already have in place alive and active training programs for people to make the transition to another kind of job. So that those two kind of go along with one another. And then the final piece, it's more a kind of a big policy piece. And that is that I think maybe the primary principle to work with on this whole climate change kind of thing is that people have access, people having access to inexpensive energy is actually a human right. That if justice is about the opportunity for every person to live a fully human life, then having access to energy is essential to that process. And it's got to be cheap or free, because if they don't have access to that energy source, they can't do a lot of things that all kinds of wealthy people who can afford to pay for that energy can have. And so the principle that I would encourage this group to work off of is that having access to inexpensive or free energy is a human right. That's all I have to say.
I think, should I speak? It seems to be. All right, I will speak. I'm Susan Millar. I'm part of 350 Madison, and I live in the Madison area. And I want to address a fairly technical thing that I'm not entirely certain the governor is able to address, the governor's staff is able to address, but possibly. Based on preliminary research that the 350 Madison State Policy Group did, we found that the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority, which provides very substantial grants to contractors who are going to be building new affordable housing units all over our state. We found that the criteria in the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority application forms that these developers submit are extremely weak. So weak that pretty much every contractor that applies gets all of the credit, all of the points. By contrast, in other states, similar housing, economic development, housing authorities have very high standards for green building. And so the brand new buildings that are going up with affordable housing, which will affect the housing and housing value and the utility costs that lower income people are going to be paying in the next 50 years. These are buildings that are going to have lower utility expenses from the get-go, simply because of a criterion in the application form that we have here in Wisconsin. So if there's any way that we can strengthen that criteria for green building standards in the WIDA application form for developers, I think we could do an awful lot with a fairly simple policy change. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. The next person on the list is Jen Geigrich. Sorry. Please correct me.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Jen Geigrich. I'm with Wisconsin Conservation Voters, and I want to thank you for holding this session. And initially I wasn't going to speak, but a couple of things that folks said just kind of gave me some ideas. One of the things that I think is really important about the state plan is that we have an overarching goal of this, reducing all our carbon, getting to carbon neutral by 2050. But the reality of it is that most people don't really know what that means and don't really have access to a lot of the terminology or the programs or the things we're talking about. But the places in Wisconsin where I think we've been really good at being inclusive and coming together with good plans is at the local level. Local communities in Wisconsin really stepped up and trying to hit clean energy programs and plans. And I think part of why they're able to do that is because, one, the local representatives are actually representative of the community. And so I think they have a better understanding of what are the challenges, what are the trade-offs, where has there been the historical discrimination and pollution hotspots, know what the job training needs are. And I think one of the things that would be really great for the state to really look at is, the Milwaukee City County Task Force on Climate and Economic Equity had a jobs component, had an equity component, had a public health component. What they are looking for, and other communities who are doing this around the state, Claire's another one I can think of who did a really good job of this. They brought in a lot of community input, but what they needed initially was help from the state with doing base level modeling for where their emissions were happening, understanding what the cost benefit trade-offs were of implementing different policies. How does transportation play in? How does the fuel sourcing work? Those are all things that get pretty technical pretty fast, and people don't necessarily know how to talk about that, but they do know how to talk about how it impacts them. And so what I would really love to see is the state of Wisconsin invest in the programs that help local communities come up with their own plans so that they are meeting, they're kind of nestled into the state plan, but like that your office is helping to give them those technical resources that they need, but then also the funding they're going to need to help implement them and then finally, I think the piece that just got announced about the health equity mapping tool is going to be really, really critical because, again, we know what we want to do, but if we want to make sure that we are actually addressing those hotspots, people might know just historically what's happening in their communities, but they probably don't. And they definitely probably don't know from a very data-centric perspective that can really make sure we're maximizing that. So that's another thing that I just think, again, it's really important that the state lead with these goals, but it's the local communities who are going to help make this happen. And so I think all our efforts should be in making sure that those communities are successful. And I think if we do that, then we will be bringing in the people whose voices we often don't hear on these really technical policy specific calls. So with that, thank you.
I appreciate you speaking up. That was very helpful. Thank you. Next in line, we have Deanna Gran. I should just say first names because I think I'm messing up everyone's last names.
Hi, I'm also in 350 Madison, but I wanted to bring up the issue, one of the things that really contributes to poverty and disrupting families, and that is Wisconsin is one of the highest incarceration rates, not only in the United States, but in the world. We incarcerate 663 people per 100,000 people. The next closest is the United Kingdom. So every time we throw people in jail, we are disrupting families. And a lot of times when you're talking about crimes, if these same people had committed the crimes and had money and resources to get out, they wouldn't even be in prison. So these are crimes of poverty a lot of times. And so I think we really need to reform that. And you could take that money and use that for sustainability efforts and things like that. So I guess my focus I would like to see eliminating the school to prison pipeline. And then if you're looking at jobs, start focusing on getting those kids jobs so that they're not, causing trouble in the community and that they have a purpose. And then also I think the Native Americans, I think it's the Bad River tribe, they use a 7-generation approach. So every time they do some action, they want to see what's going to happen 7 generations into the future and how that impact is going to happen. So I think using that and using that philosophy, I think is a strong tool to use.
Thank you, Deanna. Next on our list, we have Pat.
Hi, my name is Pat Parcell and I belong to First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. And I don't have too much to say. I've heard a lot of great comments. I recently saw a film called Kiss the Ground, and it talks about our food and how we're growing it and have been growing it for many years. Basically, the microbes in the ground are disappearing. And what we need to do is do regenerative farming to make sure that we're able to have the microbes in the ground to be able to have food that is healthy for us. In that film, they talked about, so sorry. In that film, they talked about 60 years from now, not being able to grow any more crops at all, because in other words, if we don't make the changes that we need to make to become regenerative farmers or using possibly silvopasture. And that's all I really have to say. I think that farming is very important. We obviously are a farming and dairy state. And the gentleman that also touched on factory farms, I totally agree with him. I think that they're terrible and that we need to get rid of them immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And we have Tanas, 350 Madison.
Hi, yes, my name is Tanis Mathieson. I'm with 350 Madison and I live in Madison. And I wanted to say thank you for this session tonight. Thank you for addressing climate justice issues as they relate to climate change and for this opportunity to comment. As you already mentioned, lower income folks are more likely to live in neighborhoods which are more susceptible to climate chaos due to things like historic redlining, older infrastructure, less green space, lack of air conditioning, and fewer resources to evacuate in climate emergencies. And I hope some of these issues can be addressed in the plan. And I'd like to just support and make a couple of additional comments in addition to many of the things that have already been said tonight. So for example, you had talked about reaching folks that aren't normally involved in these kinds of processes. And I greatly support that, totally support that. Wondering if you and your staff who are involved in making the plan have gone outward to their meetings, to community meetings, neighborhood meetings, other organization meetings. That's just a suggestion. If you want to comment on that when I'm done, that would be great, because a lot of those people may be unlikely to attend some of the sessions that you host, and so going to them might be a good way to connect with them. This was already mentioned, so mass transit, totally support intercity rail and intra-city expansion of bus service within cities. Supporting dollars for weatherization, that was already mentioned tonight as well, for reducing utility costs, especially for lower income people. As someone mentioned, they pay a higher percentage of their income on utility bills than upper income people. So weatherization is a good solution for that. If there's any ability to subsidize residential solar, again, middle and upper class folks can often afford to install solar on their own, but lower income people don't have that opportunity often. And also, if the solar is installed on rental units, if there's a way to ensure that the utility cost savings are passed along to the renters, that would be helpful as well. And then I do believe that we will solve the climate crisis eventually, but it may take a while. And so in the meantime, we're going to need mitigation. And I very much support what's been said already about mitigating climate chaos impacts, such as funding for cooling centers, perhaps subsidized air conditioning, flood prevention projects. And I understand those primarily happen at the local level. And I am also very supportive of Jen's comments about encouraging local government involvement and relationship with this planning process. And then something very simple like tree planting in the urban heat islands where there may be a lot of cement and concrete. That is something that gets the community together, in addition to, adding green space and shade and cooling the neighborhood. And then finally, my last comment is that I'm very encouraged by Dr., I think his name was Lewandowski, and his comments about racism. And I'd like to emphasize that the reason I think that we have so much climate injustice is the systemic racism that exists in our state, in our country, in the world. And so I don't know how you can interject larger systemic racism issues in the planning process, but if possible, that's really what we need to do. We need to think big picture about some of the reasons that our lower income people are in the situation that they are. And that's it. Those are all my comments. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And just to follow up on your community engagement, I do agree. Going out to the communities and talking with community groups is definitely something that we've been doing. I think we can certainly do more of it. And again, this is also going to be an ongoing process. So as we even push out the first version of the Clean Energy Plan, we want to continue to have those conversations and ensure that it's really supporting everyone here in this state.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's see. Next we have, before I call, I'll go ahead and call on, I think was it Mark or Mike Putnam?
Hi, thank you for another opportunity. And this is deals with the equity situation. So what I want to say is that cheap energy and economic growth have been possible in large part because of the parasitic nature of our economy. So for most of our economic transactions, the external costs aren't reflected in the price of the goods and services that we consume. So in an economic transition, the buyer and seller both benefit, while the external costs, say of greenhouse gas emissions, are imposed on everyone else who get no benefits from that economic transaction. One study found that if the large energy companies, if they had paid the true external costs of their products, they would have made no profits. So I think what would be very useful is, if to the degree possible, we need to internalize those negative external costs into the price of the goods and services that we consume, so that we can better understand what the real costs are for our consumption. Now, I realize that Governor Evers is constrained by the Republican legislature, and they seem to be in favor of deregulatory efforts, which in my view are really meant to increase the amount of parasitism that goes to the benefits of parasitism to some special interest groups. And so I would suggest that a political strategy is to highlight how deregulation actually parasitizes most of the rest of the population. And I think if we had a truer picture of what things cost, we could make more informed choices, and we could better assign those costs to the beneficiaries and not impose them on everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I call on the next person, Don, I know there are attendees here that are representatives of communities and some of the groups that we've been talking about that have been affected by climate justice and environmental justice. I would just encourage you to raise your hand if you want to share the challenges that you see within your community or the opportunities that you see within your community, because we definitely want to hear from you as well. So please do not hesitate to raise your hand and share your story with us. Don, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity, and also lifting up all voices to speak, because we really need to hear most from the people who are most impacted as to what they feel like they need for themselves. One of the things I wanted to start with is, I think we have, and obviously there are different places that some of these fixes will have to be, or changes will have to be implemented. But I think there's a number of problems right now with our current utility structure and systems that are ongoing. One of the things, and hopefully it's in the process of starting to be rectified, that produces a lot of inequity, is the high fixed fees that are currently in place with a lot of utilities in Wisconsin that really disproportionately impact low energy users and low income communities and communities of color. And I think those need to be lowered significantly, and then instead have higher use fees to disincentivize using more energy and reduce the climate change impacts. So there are various methods that could be done to do this. One is consider progressive or inclined rate structures. There's also right now, businesses have much better rate structures than residential customers do. So I would suggest that's a point of concern. We're incentivizing, high use by businesses who need to especially work on reducing energy use too. You could consider income-based rates. I believe in Michigan, they did a study. I think the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, if I recall, might have done this or would know of it, where they had lowered rates for some low-income people. And they found out the utilities were actually bringing in more money by virtue of the fact that the bills were more affordable for the low-income customers. So it's something I think we should look at here. Also, utilities in general want to sell more energy because it creates more infrastructure. So I would like to see utility incentives to invest more in energy efficiency. That could be possibly through an expansion of focus on energy, but somehow, to where you incentivize utilities more to invest in energy efficiency, especially for people in need who have high energy burdens, like was identified in Milwaukee. And as per the previous speaker too, especially when it comes to energy use, I think we need to include all climate health impacts in our assessments and the costs of that use. We are not doing that right now. So I think that's a critical thing. And some other things I'd like to see, or that would have possibilities, to train people in communities to especially do energy efficiency work. You might have contractors work with people to train them to work, to pick up skills, start their own businesses, but you will have people who are maybe more trusted contractors and other, consultants who live in those communities, who people can call on and might be more likely to work with. It's also good because a lot of people, if you want to talk about energy efficiency, it's a real challenge to figure out where the money's going to come from, how much it's going to cost, who you're going to work with, where the benefits are, and so on. And with Community Power Minnesota, they worked with the utilities there to develop people who could go into houses, explain this stuff to people, not hand out glossy brochures, but talk to people. And by the time they walked out of there, the person can know what it's going to cost, what the benefits were, who they were going to work with. And also they were talking about zero interest loans, I believe, and they were getting a much higher rate of energy efficiency adoption than it went from 5% to over 20% just by doing that in terms of people adopting energy efficiency. So it helps to have trained messengers and programs in those communities. And also, like I said, the zero interest loans, or perhaps community green banks might be another idea to work with. Also, for a lot of people right now, to invest in solar or energy efficiency means that money has to come up front. There's a proposal right now for community solar, and I'd like to see something like that go through, including third-party solar and other means of relieving the upfront burdens that people have to bear right now, whereas it could be the long-term payoff, but they can't avail themselves of it because they don't have the money to do that. Another key issue for people who are low income is that they're often renters. And it's very tough, especially if they're paying the utility bills, to incentivize landlords to do energy upgrades. So I think we need to look at how we can do that better and how we can incentivize landlords to increase the energy efficiency in buildings that they own. And speaking of affordable housing, one of the things in a lot of places when they talk about affordable housing, they'll just talk about the cost of rent. Uniformly, that'll be talking about the cost of rent plus utilities and looking at that as a basis of comparison. As somebody brought up about, providing energy efficient, low income housing, that's a real critical thing for the long term, as well as to lower carbon footprints. Beyond that, people mentioned about affordable mass transit, better and affordable mass transit. Obviously, there could be things that go into community design and so on that are going to impact that, I think they need to be taken a look at, but that's for another section here. And I also want to be very supportive of urban forestry and agriculture that will especially benefit communities of color that are in need. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate all the thoughts there. Next in line, we have Emma Moulton.
Can you hear me? I'm Lise Moulton. I belong to a new Jewish group called Dayenu Circles. Ours is the Shalom Dayenu Circle in Milwaukee. We're working a lot on developing solar farms and finding matching developers with land and getting Jewish institutions to contribute and build with a portion of the energy going to reduced utility bills for low-income communities. I'm not quite sure I understand what these listening forums are for. Some of the things that we're saying are, nice pie in the sky. This would be a great goal to have someday, or, we wish it was right this minute. But are we a think tank? Are we sharing ideas with each other? Are we singing to the choir? I don't quite understand what is happening with the ideas. Some of the ideas have been repeated, and I certainly agree with the use of agricultural land. I think that's extremely important and will be productive for our farmers. But what are you going to do with this information besides, a list of, gee, here's 50 ideas that citizens have? That was it. Are you on mute? I don't hear you. Okay. That's all I had to say.
I'm frozen again.
So what is your answer? Is somebody going to answer it?
Maria, I think we can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay, I'm frozen again. Sorry. So yes, I appreciate that, and I don't want anyone to be confused by the listening sessions. So the Clean Energy Plan is creating the actionable pathway towards reducing emissions in the state. The listening sessions are intended to hear ideas and thoughts and stories from communities about how the clean energy transition is affecting them. Some of the ideas that the communities and people have that will support the clean energy transition. So a lot of what I've heard this evening will be taken back to the administration, and we're going to take a look at everything and see. I'm going to report this to the governor's office and lieutenant governor's office and the cabinet secretaries and talk to them about what the public is interested in seeing as part of the clean energy plan. So it's not, you're talking to the administration when you're attending these listening sessions. And what we're going to do is we're going to synthesize everything that you've put together here and brought forth here and share that with them as this is what the public is interested in. And this is what, and we broke it out by separate topics because we want to hear these separate areas and want to hear how we can prioritize these different areas like justice, environmental justice, and equitable economic development. You know, what are the things we need to be doing to expedite environmental justice and equitable economic development? What are the programs we need to elevate? I heard a lot about weatherization and getting to communities and talking to them and educating communities about why this is important. And so what we can do is we can take that back and we can say, okay, how can we do that? And how can we formulate a plan and issue a plan that makes someone accountable to get that done and to create an implementation work to get that done. So that's why we're having these listening sessions, is to ensure that we're capturing these ideas from folks, capturing your success stories, your challenges, the things that you want to see done, and trying to insert them into the plan and figure out how can we get this done, and what do Wisconsinites want, and what do you want to happen here in the state? I apologize again, my computer is not liking me this evening, so I can't see any of you, but I'm glad that you can see me. Was that helpful at all, or do you have any feedback on that? I'm happy to take that.
I guess I'd like to know if there are decision makers, along the way. I mean, again, it's nice to say, oh, I think we should do this in my neighborhood or whatever. I just don't see that has enough teeth to it. And the other thing is, we are working with an opposition that is very rigid in Wisconsin. As long as these Republicans really are committed to disagreeing with whatever the Democrats put forward, again, we can talk to we're blue in the face, but if we don't have any legislators who will support us and we're not pressuring them, whatever we think really, I think, is not that important, unless everybody tells you the same issue and you can go back to the governor and say, hey, there's a consensus on this one, let's push this forward. But sometimes I find it's very frustrating that, I mean, I learn from other people and, I'm part of the choir, but I don't feel like I'm having any impact on people who are going to make the decisions and who know how much money we have. And what's ridiculous, we couldn't possibly afford that. So that's just my response.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. And I understand. Again, sorry for the noise over here. Caitlin, are there any more hands raised?
No, that was the last hand that was up at the moment.
Okay.
Okay, we just got 2 more hands. So
okay, good. Go ahead and call on those. I'll be right back.
Yeah, Don Ferber, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just want to add one additional comment. I want to pick up on Jen Giegrich's really fine comments about connecting communities, but I think it can even go beyond that, that like entities often tend to trust like entities, and we need to do, a lot more in the business community, and perhaps even, there are other organizations. If the state could provide more resources or be a resource for connecting up what other entities have done. And I know sometimes in the business community, they don't like to talk about how they got a competitive advantage or reduce their energy use, but, so that you could have not only communities, but businesses or organizations of a like type talking to each other about what's worked. If you could have resources for that, that might be another idea as well, too. So I just wanted to add that one.
Thank you. I will call on Bobby next.
Hi, thank you. I'm out of breath because I just got back from a run. And I was listening to all the comments while I was running, and I've heard some really amazing ideas, and I want to thank you for having this listening session. And one thing that I wanted to talk about, I'm in Green Bay and I work with an environmental justice task force. And we've been spending a lot of time on line 3 and line 5 the past months. And I will say I have not heard anything from Governor Evers about line 3 or line 5, which is very troubling. Bad River is getting pounded by Enbridge with appeal after appeal after appeal. And I don't see the Evers administration backing them up. Tonight, the City of Green Bay City Council is hearing a resolution in support of clean water and treaty rights, similar to the resolution that the City of Madison passed. And the union community is pushing against it, which I can understand because they need jobs. So that's just a very poignant issue that I think is a really big example right now of what this is going to look like. But we need to have clean energy at some point, and we need to stop this dirty energy at some point. And so I feel a little skeptical that the Evers administration is trying to do a clean energy plan, but they're not fighting against line 3 and line 5 right now.
Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate that input. I did notice that there is a phone number here. If you wanted to make a comment, you can press *9 or just unmute if you'd like. I didn't want to leave you out there if you had a comment. 715 ending in 8863. Next up, Kathy.
Thank you. I totally agree with what the last speaker just said, and I'll add the I-94 expansion in Milwaukee as another very disappointing thing that works against a climate action plan. And another suggestion that would not cost a lot of money would be for the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy to help any entity, city, county, school district, business, nonprofit, create a climate action plan. Having a Zoom meeting with people about how to do that would not cost a lot of money and would get people thinking about how they can make their own changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Anyone else who hasn't spoke up yet? Rose.
Hi, I'm sorry, I did comment earlier. If
That's okay,
that's
you
okay,
can-
since everybody else seems to have asked their question. You had talked earlier during your presentation about the fact that Wisconsin is not currently energy independent, that we import most of our energy in the form of fossil fuels. I'm wondering if there's a plan for any kind of regulation of out-of-state solar companies. We've been hearing recently about out-of-state companies, New York companies coming in and building large solar farms, leasing land from farmers, and leasing and oftentimes farmland, not brown lands, but actually arable land for large-scale solar farms. Are there any regulations on the table about this? Is there going to be any attempt to make more of the clean energy that's available owned by Wisconsinites or by the state possibly? And also not just in terms of the ownership of the energy, but also where is the energy going to be placed? Sorry.
Yeah, and I think we are aware of that, and taking into consideration as part of all the strategies, like as we're talking about expanding solar, what can we do to expand that development here in the state and utilize state workers and things like that. So that's we're looking into that as part, potentially one of the strategies. But again, we haven't landed on the final strategies at all too. So, hearing that, this is an issue that is coming up in your discussions is helpful, so that we can share that this is something that we would want to see and see public support of that if we can, have the business here. Any other comments? I see a number of folks that are still hanging on, so I really appreciate your attending late in the day. Any stories of how the energy transition has impacted you or your community? Any ideas that you might have in addition to what has been presented this evening? Any last minute thoughts? Oh, Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to mention that the Sierra Club has a program called Ready for 100, which is a national initiative to get cities and counties and states to commit to zero carbon, 100% renewable energy. And others have mentioned work done by communities. La Crosse is a Ready for 100 city, so is Eau Claire, Madison, et cetera. And that's one way that's brought many of us to the state's clean energy plan, and that is that our communities have already done work on this. And so that's another thing that might help is encouraging other communities to take this up. There are a lot of resources, and it might spread the word about the benefits from health and environmental to economic. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, Mike, Mark, I can't remember. I'm sorry, Mr. Putnam.
Thanks. Yeah, it's Mike.
Mike, okay.
Yeah, about the community engagement. I live in Sauk County, and a couple years ago they did revise their 10-year plan, and it was it was like, let's just keep building everything. No, let's cram in as many houses. Let's there's a lot of farmland they want to gobble up, and they have not been at all receptive to any kind of clean energy. They're concerned about reliability and the cost. So, so community engagement is problematic. Depends on who you're talking to. And I just want to share my experiences with that.
Thank you. One of the comments I received earlier I thought was super helpful is that it's hard to I lost my chat, but it was basically that it's hard to get into communities and have these conversations because energy seems so like far away, and that it's important that more education and outreach happens, and that certain folks, like we talked about multi-unit dwellings and landlords, and that certain people are held accountable to push forward energy efficiency and renewables type programs. And so I like this this push for working within communities and local governments, and just there's a lot happening on that level. And so I think definitely we've been looking at that as well as what sort of levers can we pull and what support can we give to communities. So I think I want to make sure that we're expanding that discussion and making sure that that outreach reaches all communities. And communities within communities, like not just the local governments, but certainly the communities that have been disproportionately impacted. And so I think a lot of data is needed on that. And so our office is a part of the that mapping project that was just recently announced by the governor's office. We're helping out with that as well. But certainly would appreciate any ideas on like how to engage more with communities to ensure that we're getting the farthest reached and the farthest education outreach on this as possible. Any other comments? Ella, I see you raise your hand.
Yeah, hi. So I just joined this meeting. I'm a little late. Unfortunately, I came from another meeting myself. But I heard you guys were talking a little bit about what I believe is farming. And I had an idea of maybe something that we can encourage farmers to begin working more towards. And that would be like having a more regenerative agricultural based system versus what we are doing now.
Thank you. All right. Any final comments? Any last thoughts here? Thoughts on the process, on the just opening it up for any other thoughts. Right, we're near the end, and I appreciate everyone sticking through. I think the only thing I'd like to do here is I would like to share. We do have a couple more listening sessions coming up. We have 3 more, and they will be on Thursday this week, as well as Tuesday next week. And let me share my screen so you can see that. Apologize, I started from the beginning of my slide here. Get to it. Okay, so we have listening session scheduled for Thursday, October 21st. We're going to be talking about infrastructure and industry, the things that we can be doing as it relates to buildings and industry and manufacturing. The session 3 will be transit and transportation, October 26th from 11 to 1 p.m. and talking specifically about the ideas and strategies that we can look to reduce emissions in transportation and transit. And the last session will be the same day, October 26th from 6 to 8 p.m. in the evening on Tuesday, in talking specifically about clean energy and energy efficiency. And again, just as a reminder, these sessions are intended to listen to your ideas and your thoughts, how the transition as it relates to these different topic areas are affecting you, and how we can transition to a clean energy economy quickly and expeditiously, and look at high impact strategies and immediate action strategies that can get us there. So I really, really appreciate your time and your patience with me as I work through my technical difficulties. As I mentioned before, this is going to be an ongoing process. We're aiming for this to be a living document. We'll push the first version out as soon as we possibly can, after we've had the public input and the review of an organization of strategies around the different pathways. And you are welcome to make public comment online as well. We have a public comment form at osce.wi.gov. If you go to Clean Energy Plan, the input form will pop right up for you. You can select it and provide us some written input as well. We will accept public comments on an ongoing basis. So when the plan is released, you can provide public comment well after the plan as well. So with that, thank you so much for your time and your efforts to pull together your ideas and thoughts, and would just encourage you to continue to submit those ideas and thoughts. Reach out to me anytime, or reach out to the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy if you'd like to have some one-on-one discussions. And a sincere thanks to you all. Have a great evening.